1990, which is somehow forgotten. It is the problem also of what I have called here revolutionary optimism. The people who have 89 was in the whole region a time of historic ages, a time when people took their destiny at hand, risked a lot, because you know, after Tiananmen, nobody was sure what will happen. Even in the more, let's say, civilized countries, it was not sure whether it will not be repression. In the GDR, former GDR, it was very unsure up to the beginning of October. In other countries, it was possible, perhaps not massive shooting as it happened in China, but perhaps also a crackdown, arrests, some beatings, or let's say institutional consequences of various types were still possible. So when people got into the streets, certainly they were not the majority of the society, but there were significant groups of people who got to the streets, or who got to the polls in Poland. It was unsure what will happen after. And therefore, they took their risks, but they had also this liberating feeling that they are real agents of history. And the idea that they take their destiny in their hands and help shaping it. Certainly not alone. The sentiment of being immersed in a huge mass of people was also very important, both in providing a certain sense of security and also in providing the sense of being not alone, but of being part of something very important, as has been discussed by Bogdan and Dragoș, one of the indicators of happiness you mentioned there. There was also, certainly with some different times, there was the illusion that a fresh start can be made, that really society is now escaping constraints and will be somehow free to decide what we do. How do we shape our societies? How do we do it better in order to improve our lives? And this was not only, it was basically for those who have been on the streets, but it was in fact a larger sentiment. Also of many of those who had just bystanded the real revolutions. There was an exuberance, if you look at the sources of the early 90s in Romania, but if you look also on the discussions in Poland in 89 already, or if you look probably, I think also in Hungary, there would be some, although there was different situation, but there was an exuberance of people trying to see what would be the best ways to organize society. There were certainly debates how to shape it, how much anti-communism, or how much, let's say, compromise with the old elites, how much shock therapy, or how much gradual reform, how much liberalism, or how much national protection, how much restructuring of the industry, but how much freedom of commerce, of movement of people, etc., etc. How do we get to be also parts of the, let's say, club of well-organized and prosperous countries like in the West? There was certainly exuberance, but also a naivety of these debates, because you can see also that it wasn't exactly so simple, and the freedom of choice was not that big. There were immediately coming the disillusions. Disillusions from many sides. I have pointed here just some of them. The disillusions because one could perceive the remnant power or just influence of communist leaders, of secret police officials, of collaborators, of people who have been, let's say, very much involved in the former system and who managed to translate, to convert their capital and to become even more powerful or more aggressive in the new setting. There was also a resurgence of material selfishness and pragmatism, which was, for example, one of the most dramatic situations was, for example, in previous Eastern Germany, where somehow the idealistic revolutionaries of the autumn of the peaceful revolution of autumn of '89 found themselves pushed to the side by the promise of an economic Eden and of Deutschmark and reunification. And they were simply put aside of the history. And in other countries there were also similar evolutions which made it also clear that the people who had got to the streets and the people who had somehow selflessly tried to improve the lot were not single in the society, and they were not the majority of the society. And they were not able to set the agenda. There was also the burden, the very heavy burden, of existing economic and social structures. And, for example, too much industry, too much non-performing industries, economic institutions, social habits, lack of, let's say, human resources in key sectors, and a lot of things which could be put under this frame, the burden of existing social structures, both in terms of backwardness, of economic and social backwardness comparing with other societies, and even inside the group of post-socialist countries, there were significant differences, for example, between Czechoslovakia and Romania, Bulgaria, or Albania. And there was also an insufficient capacity of adaptation to the new post-industrial world which had already been established in the world economy, and lack of capacity to adapt to global pressures, which were significant. And the problem was also that, for example, the Eastern Bloc collapsed. For Romania, which had been a maverick in the Eastern Bloc, this was not that important. But for other countries, the demise of the Council of Mutual Economic Relations was, assistance, excuse me, was very important, and because very much of their trade had been trade inside the socialist system. And this added to the problems and made things more and more complicated. So there occurred also a very significant transformation crisis, or let's say output collapse, but not only economic output collapse, it was also destruction of existing economic and social relations, frameworks, and certainly it was also important. This transformation crisis was to a large extent inevitable, and it was in fact even beneficial, because you could not build up without destroying something. It's the creative destruction, let's say, of Schumpeter. But at a certain extent it was a bit of too much destruction and too much also human suffering relating to it. Look, if go for the 90s, just average, it's also a significant differentiation across the region. If you look at the average annual growth rate of GDP in the region, you may see also it's certainly one decade. I'll give you then some data immediately also on a yearly basis. But if you look, it's also clear, for example, that some of the countries performed significantly better and some performed below average or significantly below average. Certainly we don't have in this table, if we would have the post-Soviet republics, it would have been even more dramatic because, for example, in Moldova you would have a bit of -11% yearly, which is dramatic, and this explains also why the Republic of Moldova became the last, the occupier, the 45 occupier of the last place in Europe according to GDP per capita. And, but you see also the significant performance of Poland due to two factors: the poor performance of the 80s, which some of the growth is some catching up, but it's also the, let's say, merit of a very strong, clear program of reforms immediately, the so-called shock therapy. The shock therapy is not necessarily the best solution. It's because, for example, the second best performer, which is Slovenia, was a very gradualist reform and a very different pattern of economic reform. So there is not just one pattern towards, let's say, good performance or happiness, but it's also a problem of coherence of economic policies and of their adaptation to the real problems and needs of each country or society. Certainly, you can see also the average performance of other countries, and Romania and Bulgaria are on the bad side of history in this respect. Did this trend of towards differentiation inside the region last? I would say not really, but it left durable effects for the future. And now I will show you some data regarding GDP per capita evolution on the yearly basis. There are some problems with this data, but I don't want to get into too many details. And you can see there is a significant decline in the early 90s in almost all countries of the region, and there are different performances up from the mid of the 90s to the late 90s. For example, Romania and Bulgaria experienced a second fall, while the Central European countries performed significantly better, also due to much more foreign investment, foreign direct investment, and better policies, and also a higher starting point. And there is a certain convergence in the early 2000s up to, let's say, 2008, but not really the differences which are at the start are in fact also increasing, at least in absolute terms. So the convergence is mild.